Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining in today's CDW hosted webinar. My name is Noor Bains. I'm a Senior Security Solutions Architect, and I'll be presenting this webinar along with Ivo Wins. Before I pass it along to Ivo for a quick introduction, I just want to set some housekeeping. So everyone will be on mute, but definitely we want to make it as interactive as possible, right? So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to answer some questions as we go along the webinar. We'll definitely try to answer everything at the end of the webinar. If not, we'll try to reach out to everyone by email. Right, Ivo, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Noor. Welcome, everybody. My name's Ivo Wins. I manage the Security Solutions Architecture team across Canada for CDW Canada. I've been in the IT business for about 20 years and focused specifically on information security for the last 16 years or so. So my focus started from the services side and move more towards the managed security services side before starting to do this, which is talking to people about solving their problems and talking about new technologies and how we can help clients taking a risk and taking a business perspective to solving problems. It's what we do in our team, and Noor is one of those members of my team who does this on a day-to-day basis. So I look forward to presenting this to you guys, talking about SASE, and also look forward to your questions where we can have a discussion on what this technology means to you and how it can help, or when it can start helping you solve your business problems, your IT problems, and more importantly, your security problems. So thanks, Noor.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So same introduction, just in Evo's part of Evo's team, helping customers to make sure their security posture is at what they are looking for, right? Helping customers with their business, depending on their business vertical, their use case, their budget verticals, right? And integrating solutions right into customers, depending on their risk assessments and risk posture as well. So in today's webinar, we'll be focusing on SASE, right? So for the rest of the webinar, our videos will be turned off just to make sure we save bandwidth as well, right? Make sure it's a seamless experience for everyone. Right.
Thanks.
Right, perfect. All right, so what today's agenda will be covering, we'll be going over the first being the use case for SASE, right? Why there's a need for SASE, going on from the shift of the typical perimeter approach, right? The identity being the new perimeter. Moving along, how does SASE solve that use case? And then going over the different multi-layer architecture approach that SASE has, right? Going over different components of SASE incorporates to solve those issues. So yes, quick agenda, and I'll move on to the next slide. All right, so CDW did a couple of security studies this year, right? One being the security study, which was published earlier this year, and the other being the optimizing ID study, which was made public in the last 3 or 4 months. So the CDW security study that had really interesting findings. One being, as we are already aware of, right, the cloud initiatings has increased much more, and specifically from a security perspective, we're seeing that the cloud security is not moving at the same pace as we see the cloud initiatives, right? We're seeing more workloads being transitioned into cloud. We're seeing more applications being transitioned into SaaS, right? Unfortunately, the cloud security is not moving at the same pace. Our respondents really raised good points, right? One being the cloud security. They felt the cloud security training was not as comprehensive as the other security trainings that are in the normal security aligned world. Other factors that we, from my experience, I've seen is that security architecture, network security architecture, network engineers, there's this slight transitional approach, right, as well, when we talk about cloud security, right? When we talk about cloud, there's a transitional approach from our technology perspective, right? which definitely there's a gap that everyone needs to come along the board. And there's a process gap as well with when we talk about cloud, there's definitely more teams being involved, right? You can't really be in silos. You have your DevOps teams, you have application teams, you have your developers, right? So there's the process of bringing all different teams and then working to implement security, right? And having that particular posture in cloud security as well. One example being, and definitely something to look at for each organization, right? That the patching on cloud, I mean, there's definitely being lacking from what we have seen our respondents. The on-prem infrastructure patching it's much more. Again, this really varies for different respondents, but that's what we've seen from the survey that we did. The other survey, which is also interesting, is the CDW Optimizing ID study. 93% of the participants mentioned that they are looking for evolving tech space to utilize it for better network optimization. And the other being 51% of the IT professionals believe that their employers will allow, the organization will allow their employees to work from home, right? Having that flexibility past COVID, past the pandemic as well. So from these two things, what I really want to summarize is one, yes, cloud security is there. There's a digital disruption, right? Depending on where an organization is in their digital disruption path. Some organizations are already well beyond, they have their workloads in cloud, right? In some regards, organizations are, due to the trigger of the post-pandemic, they're at a path they're having their users work from home at this point, right? So there's one being their security, right? And when users are working from home, the second question that comes into network optimization. So these two are really the findings that I want to echo from this, and how this further elaborates in our SASE presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you that value.
Noor,
Yep.
I'm going to just interrupt a bit. And I think it may be a good time. There was early on when participants signed up for this webinar, they had an opportunity to ask questions. And one of the questions that was asked, and I think if the question fits really well here, and I think it really fits into what we're talking about from a Canadian perspective and what is happening from a digital transformation perspective. The question was, how far along in the digital transformation journey are you seeing most companies in Canada? And it kind of answers it a little bit. I think that there is, we have to look at all the studies that we've done pre-COVID with a COVID lens through it, right? Like we're sort of looking at it in a different way. So I'll give you an opportunity to answer. I know we've kind of discussed in the past, but how far along the digital transformation do you think most companies in Canada are at this point?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question, right? And so it really, as I mentioned, it really depends on different companies. We are seeing some companies that already before the pandemic, right? They're already having their workloads in the cloud. Their applications are consumed in SaaS. Their workloads are in IaaS, right? And some companies post-pandemic are having that disruption of having their users working from remotely, right? So different organizations in Canada are really in different space, right? To put a number, I think I'll let you further comment on that, but we'll definitely seeing it from a digital disruption. We're seeing at least, for example, we discussed before, right? If the number was at 3, we're seeing a high number out of 30%. Now it's much more companies are in that space, right? But are the security at the same pace? Probably not, right? Do you want to further elaborate? I think you had a couple of more points, right, on that as well.
Yeah, yeah. What I was saying is, if we were to, there's two aspects of digital transformation. One of them is, sort of making sure, and that was the big rush when everybody was sent home, was how do I stop people from having to hand paper to each other, sign documents that we used to sign in the office. How do we cut down, how do we continue to work without that human interaction? And a lot of companies had to make those decisions really quickly. And if we had to compare, the amount, I think we increased quite a bit on the digital transformation side, but did we Did we do it in a sophisticated manner, and did we do it in a secure manner? I would say no. So, if we were, a 3 out of 10 from an adoption perspective, we had to jump to a, 6 or 7 out of 10 from an adoption perspective. But I think from a sophistication perspective, most organizations in Canada feel, and from a security perspective, most organizations feel that they're still lagging behind, and they may have gone from a 3 to a 4 or a 3.5 out of 10, right? So, if we had to kind of quantify in an overall broad perspective, that's what we're seeing. And I think it's actually the same across, large, large government and large organizations in Canada and financial organizations. I think that same number applies almost to everybody. Everybody had to make a jump, but I think that most organizations are worried about how they got there. And what shortcuts they had to take from a security perspective. So,
yeah,
answers that question. I don't know how much more time we want to spend on this slide, but I think that hopefully that answers the question that was asked earlier.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry
Thank you.
for interrupting here, but I think it was the right time.
Definitely. I do want to add one more thing, right? Back in, if I look at when I was in, 2016, 2017, there were still a bit of the notion that cloud is not secure, right? I mean, we are talking about government, financial organization, right? There's still that. But now, I mean, as we deal with different kind of customers, right? There's definitely more susceptibility on cloud as well, right? Cities, governments, right? There's definitely, again, we have to make sure compliance is always into the picture, right? But there's definitely more susceptibility, right, into having your workers in the cloud as well.
Yeah, it's definitely shifting for sure.
Right. So identity being the new perimeter. As we move along these slides, we'll have different architecture diagrams as well. For example, after this slide, we hope to provide you some value from an architecture perspective as well, right? How architectures were right now, and then eventually, as we move along, how SASE will be able to provide that value. So, as I mentioned before, even before pandemic, right, the world was becoming more digital, right? The digital transformation was already happening. What it did really triggered it for organizations who were a bit hesitant right now. Really, each organization have to revisit their perimeter, right? Your data centers cannot be the focal point, right? You have your users working remotely, right? How are we protecting that traffic? How do we have that visibility for companies that have different branch locations, right? If you have public cloud, right? How are you protecting one traffic going in from your users to public cloud and in the public cloud, right? Same goes for SaaS applications. Are we just using proxies, right? For having that visibility for cloud? Do we only have CASP solutions, right? And in silos, I mean, these work, right? But how do we have the one single pane of glass visibility as well? The question being, when users are working from home, right? You have your public cloud, your SaaS applications. If do users go back all to your data center and then by remote access VPN and then access your public cloud, right? SaaS applications. And if they do that, how does it affect the user experience? How does it affect the pipeline limitations? Depending on before pandemic, if you had your 100 users working remotely, right now you have 300. How does it really affect the final edge device that's really doing the deep packet inspection, right? Is the throttle really affecting the user experience, right? Now the second being when we have, if we try to really go away from that, not having the users directly go from your data center, if they directly access the public cloud and SaaS, how does it really change the visibility, right? Do we have all the visibility of what's happening in our cloud, one, cloud environment, two, when the traffic is accessing, right? Do we know if there's an indicator of compromise? So this brings a lot of different questions into that approach. I'm going to pass on the next slide to the architecture and how it has been. All right, Ivo, do you want to take on this one?
Sure, absolutely, and I think this is what I want to kind of people take away from this is how things have evolved and how we got where we are and what we see as the future, and what we're seeing in the market as the future. And I think the first slide here is our standard, how things used to be. having our internal assets within our organization, accessing, internal applications, databases, and file servers within a data center. What we had here is we had an opportunity to control everything, right? We had an opportunity to control through ACLs on the switch. We had an opportunity to route things in the right direction and then put ACLs on that router. And we also had the opportunity to put, internal firewalling, be it on the host or be it on the network. We had and we had visibility into everything and control into all the applications that were happening there. On the next slide is where we talk about the move more so to, now we're thinking we need to start leveraging public data centers, be it, public cloud, be it third-party co-locations. We have evolved to say there is a value to putting servers within public data centers. There's value to putting servers all over the world. There's availability advantages that you can gain by using a public data center. So but still having those assets within our network was very useful, right? It was very useful for us to put the right level of control and manage those assets. Once we went a little further, if you go to the next slide, Noor.
Right. So
that's when we identified where the SASE problem. Sorry, where the SASE problem it can solve and what it's looking to solve. So if you can take it from here. Noor.
Right, perfect. Thank you. So we'll come back to the changing architecture with SASE as well. I just want to go over quickly how does SASE solve this. So SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge, when it's implemented properly, right? It's meant to provide secure access to no matter where your users are, workloads, devices, applications, no matter where they're hosted, right? So it's meant to provide secure access. And as I have been echoing along this past 15 minutes of the webinar, this becomes really critical, right? One, we see more users join remote workforce, right? We are seeing more SaaS applications being rapidly adopted, right? We're seeing data moves among different data centers, among different branch offices, and between different hybrid and multi-cloud environment, right? So the SASE really provides value in that aspect. Now, other things is we have the reduced complexity, right? There's one infrastructure, one vendor, one management interface, right? You have your networking components, which will move along, which will be further discussed as we move along, your SD-WAN component, security, DLP, right? Everything being in a single pane of view, right? Which really helps one from a perspective of manageability, right? You can troubleshoot more easily. You have to do forensic analysis. It's much easier, and it really helps a lot of the issue that a lot of organization has. And it really is from small to large, right? You want to make sure your security engineers, network engineers are really focusing. They're not really going from one technology to another, right? The learning curve it's much smoother, right? The rapid path of adoption where we don't really have to apply each technology, right? Deploy each technology. The path becomes really rapid from that to one from a networking, your connectivity perspective, right? And two from your security perspective as well. Now, as we mentioned, right, when we backhaul all the traffic to your data center, the user experience will lag, right? Your user experience won't be as good as, it should be, right? So the SASE really comes into the picture. The users, again, when they're accessing something, for example, they access something from North America, to other branch office anywhere else, you're just accessing the closest pop-up location, right, to where your location is, and it's much seamless experience from that point. From a business perspective, the consumption model really changes, right? We're seeing more businesses going along, they're more being from an OpEx model, right? So that really it strikes a check mark definitely from a business perspective as well. And the low OpEx model, right? The low operational costs, again, this is for each use case, right? As we move along, I do want to echo that each use case is different for each business, right? For each, depending on their architecture perspective. So there's, in some architectures, the operational costs can be decreased, especially for organizations who have different branches in different continents, right? And they're using SD-WAN, right? That can really, in some aspects, have low operational costs as well, right? And last but not the least, you have better security. When we have better security, we'll be able to understand any kind of and detect and identify any kind of anomalous user behavior, right? the last aspect being some aspects of the security are transitioned to your SASE provider. This being a SaaS application, right? The vendor will own the patching, right? Updating uptime. So some of the positive from a perspective of SASE providers. I'm going to pass it on to Ivo for the next few slides on the changing architecture and how does the SASE architecture look like.
Absolutely. And when we talk about the changing architecture and we look at that data center and where we've come from a public cloud perspective, and now allowing remote users and allowing unmanaged endpoints, SASE really wants to, this is the problem we're trying to solve here, right? Which is, how do I make sure that I have that level of user experience that Nora was talking about? How do I control with a single pane of glass, everything is being accessed, be it directly from remote locations, be it the home, be it a cafe, wherever you are. How do I control access to that public data center that's happening, outside of my purview of my edge firewall? How do I control that, and how do I manage that, and how do I see what services are being used, be it whether they are things that are hosted within my public data center, or they're unsanctioned applications or unsanctioned devices. How do I get that single pane of view? And I think that's one of that's where we're trying to get from a SASE perspective and have that one point of view. And I think the next slide is the final slide that's recommended. But we're gonna talk a little more about what SASE applications mean. What SaaS applications mean and how SASE can help people access those applications. So, be it, what you would call sanctioned applications within your organization that you've given, that you recommended for people to use, and also applications that are sort of in the gray area where you allow people to use, and applications where you don't want people to use. And that's where CASB and SASE start to come together, right, and give you the accessibility to have that single point of view and have that visibility into your public data center, allow connection back to your internal data center and wherever applications need to stay with, whether they're staying there for financial reasons, or be it technical compatibility reasons. If you're a mainframe or whatever it is within your environment still needs to happen, you can make that happen. And for the unmanaged endpoints, SASE, is highly integrated with next-gen antivirus and EDR solutions to allow that, to allow endpoint users to have that security and that visibility and have the same level of protection that you would give to a machine within your network, to give access to machines that are walking around outside of your control within the home, or control within the office or branch offices. So this is the utopian view of how easy this thing can be, right? There's obviously a lot of complications to come to moving there, but we'll get into those pieces in the next slides in the future. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to this that's worth touching on.
From architecture, I think you nailed it, right? I'll be discussing in the next few slides how these different components fit in, right, from a multi-layer architecture perspective. But yeah, you're totally right. Right.
Awesome.
Right. So the multi-layer architecture, right? It really is focusing on the security as a service and the network as a service component. The SASE is really the technologies, having different technologies that are baked in, right? Which normally are separate entities, but now can provide value in just one vendor, right? Example, I mean, the pipe, for example, it is a zero trust architecture, right? Zero trust architecture itself, I mean, there's no really one technology that it can provide that, right? It's really a combination of providing security policies across different of these technologies, or having your SSL decryption, having your DNS, DLP, right? And I'll be touching these different components each in the next few slides as well. But really embedding all these technologies from multi-layer architecture, having a single pane of glass, right? I mean, from a network as a service perspective, IPsec VPN, SSL VPN, or SD-WAN capacity, right? QoS, right? So, and as I've mentioned before, right? One yes, it provides from a single point, right? A single point of view, but it really helps your network engineers, security engineers coexist in a single cloud platform. They're able to understand what each one is doing, right? And of course, it provides a single pane of view of glass as well. All right, so coming on to the first one, I won't be covering each of these, right? I mean, just making sure taking in consideration the time as well. And each of these topics is really deep topics, right? So I'll be really touching the tip of the iceberg, right? But definitely, we're happy to go on call with any if you have further questions later on as well. So CASP, the SD-WAN solution. What does SD-WAN really solve, right? It's making sure, one, that there's connectivity to different branches, your connectivity between your data center branches, remote, right? The other aspect being the branches are able to access internet, right, directly rather than backhauling to your data to your headquarters. However, this brings in one question of your security, right? SD-WANs are typically not built, taking into security as the first, right? I have really seen the sometimes SD-WAN organizations are incorporating SD-WAN during the POC stage. Security comes up as a last point, right? So one question to really think of when we have SD-WAN, not just limited to SASE, right? Whenever we incorporate SD-WAN, having the security as the first or along the line, right? Other aspects being your complexity that SD-WAN can bring. Again, this is really depending on organization, right? One complexity that we have seen in different customers, especially for different customers who are really located in all the continents. I mean, you have North America, Australia, Europe, right? With SD-WAN, you have first mile, middle mile, and the final mile, right? First mile leads the hop, right? It's really no issue. But in the middle mile, depending on, right, there can be thousands of miles in between. We have seen things can become a bit complicated, right? And not being able to understand where the pairing is happening, right? It's in a sense, it can become a bit difficult to troubleshoot, right? So what is the alternative? You really have to make sure you have your own private network, right? You have your different hubs in different continents, and they are connected which via private link, which organization buy from different providers, right? And then you pair with your SaaS and public cloud, which at that point, by using the overlay network, works perfectly, right? But it brings in that question of having the extra cost with organization we're trying to save via MPLS, right? So how does SASE really help in that solution? So SASE does provide exactly that private link, right? But that cost is really in that SASE model, right? You have your different pop-up locations that are already being leveraged during the SASE, and you have your private network that is built in. Your branches are connected via IPsec VPN, remote users connect via SSL VPN, right? Different partners can log in. You have pairing into your SaaS and cloud providers as well, right? Again, different SASE SASE vendors leverage different ways, right? Some vendors use the public cloud networks, right? Some vendors who already have SD-WAN network, right? They're using different, already leveraging their current SD-WAN infrastructure, right? They use that and build SASE on top of it, right? No, I mean, it really depends what fits for a customer, right? But in a sense, that's what SASE really can solve with SD-WAN from a OpEx cost as well, as I mentioned in one of the previous slides as well. I mean, one example being you have a user that's coming, it's connecting from Australia, North America, right? And it has to go to a branch location that's located far away. In a sense, it connects to the pop-up location in that continent, from then outbound traffic from internet goes to other branch, right? So it brings in your secure internet access, I mean, from branch to headquarters, from branch office to branch office. Moving on to the next slide, right? So, yeah, cloud security access broker and quality of services, right? CASP solution. CASP is really, it's really security and policy enforcement between your cloud and users, right? Providing the deeper visibility into cloud, into your SaaS usage as well, right? If you look at a few years back, cloud security access broker really became huge when organizations during POC or different stages, found out that the users are using Dropbox, right, with the personal accounts, right? Other factors in CASP solutions are deployed for organizations finding out, you know what, they're in our cloud, we're using 5 times the applications or that we were meant to use, right? So having that visibility. From a CASB solution basis, there are different ways to deploy it, right? We can have the inline deployment models. We can have models which are not really blocking, just on the protection mode as well, right? From a CASB perspective, having that capability, right? Not just the traffic that is going into the cloud, but traffic that's really already in the cloud, right? What kind of access we have provided to the outside world, right? From a file analysis, are we able to send it to your SASE sandboxing provider, right? Some of the value that really CASB provide. Gartner predicts by 2022, 60% of large enterprises will be using CASB, right? And CASB, in a sense, is to really put it in perspective, right, is as critical, I'll say, as you have your enterprise firewalls to protecting your data centers, right? And to sum up, the CASB is really to provide your visibility, right? It's to make sure data security is there, which includes DLP capability, right? Integrating your SASE's advanced threat protection. And once we do all these things, we are able to achieve any compliance as well, right? So it helps us from a compliance perspective as well. It can be a risk and governance stream that internally, or if there's anything you have to follow from a compliance perspective as well. Moving on to QoS. So from a QoS perspective, QoS is really to make sure we are able to provide and configure QoS, right, to make sure all the business critical traffic takes a priority, right? And even in some cases, the traffic that requires low latency, right, that becomes a priority as well. With SASE solutions, QoS can be implemented one on itself on the SASE provider, right? You can mark on the ingress traffic using a security policy. And in some cases, depending on the vendor, you can have utilize DSP markings on your on-prem device, right? And integrate into your SASE the same policy that you have. And moving on to Zero Trust Network. All right. So Zero Trust, as I've mentioned before, Zero Trust in itself is no really one vendor provides it, right? It's really Zero Trust and SASE in this case go really hand in hand, right? When we have different security principles and postures being applied, you have your CASP, you have your firewall as service, DLP, you have your advanced threat protection, right? When all of these security policies are enforced, Zero Trust is essentially achieved, right? So it's just making sure we apply security policies to having that full visibility, and we achieve Zero Trust in that aspect. One example, I mean, we can making sure we have access control for applications, right, and data again on the cloud using CASP, on-prem as well, right? If you have on-prem firewall, having the DLP capability, right? Not just for your on-prem, having the DLP capability for a CASP as well, right? Moving on to the next generation firewall features, which is really firewall as a service, right? So making sure we can have security policies for both inbound and outbound traffic, right? Having your DNS security, malware vulnerability protections, sandboxing, right? And one topic which we didn't touch in depth is SSL decryption. SSL decryption is one thing. It's a privilege that by using SASE, you don't really have to worry about your bandwidth, right? So it's a privilege that in some cases, if you have your edge device, it can be an issue, right? One, depending on your latency or throttle and user experience as well. And again, having that application-aware security policies, right, from next generation firewall perspective. Right. I'm going to pass it on to Ivo for one of the analysts, next slide, which really focuses on analyst advice as well.
No, that's fantastic. I think those it's important for us to have all those pieces identified, because SASE, while it's you know, it's great that you broke through all those pieces. I think there's a lot of clients asking. Clients ask us, where does SDWAN fit in SASE? Where does CASB fit in SASE? You know, can I buy can I buy just SASE without this? Can I buy SASE with that or not with that, right? And what does it mean to me when you talk about SD-WAN? What does it mean from a security perspective? The integration of all these things, as historically as we know in our industry, the integration of different teams is always complex, and different technologies. Integrating those technologies is a complex thing because there's a lot of silos in organizations, and SASE aims to break a lot of those, right? Here's some data from Gartner that sort of supports what we've been talking about and what we're seeing in the market. There will be a strategy to go there. CIOs and people who are in charge of organizations know that moving to cloud is one of those things that eventually is going to happen for a lot of organizations. Security has been one of these last sort of holdouts. Putting firewalls in the cloud seemed, if you came to me and told me we were doing that 10, 15 years ago, I would say you're crazy. But here we are, right? We're in the process of understanding and measuring risk and understanding where organizations want to shift the risk and shift the responsibility, and it really comes down to where does it fit in the responsibility model, right? So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but Gartner puts out something called the hype cycle, and they have one specifically for cloud security. And the hype cycle really measures, where in the overall communication with clients and expectations and hype are we sitting from a technology perspective. And the very peak there is where SASE is sitting right now in the hype cycle. So it's really expectations are super high, and they need to be carefully looked at, before making a decision. But it also says a lot about our industry that we're able to get to this point with something like this, as we're not just thinking about how to solve the problems with technology, but we're also thinking about business problems that we can help the overall business solve. So I think it's a good place for our industry to be at. So by 2024, 40% of enterprises will have strategies to adopt SASE. And if you think at the end of 2018, that was 1%. So it's going to be quite the growth cycle for SASE, and how and it's a good place for you to start to understand how it fits. And other things that the analysts say out there is that incumbency doesn't specifically mean capability. So what does it mean by that? Just because you have firewall brand X within your environment doesn't mean that you should just say, well, I guess I should buy the SASE from firewall brand X, right? Don't assume that because you've deployed this to all the sites currently, it's just the simplest path is to go to their SASE offering. Go to the market, do some shopping, and figure out what makes sense. I mean, there's advantages to staying within the same brand, but don't assume that that specifically means that they're capable because they've done great on on-prem firewalls, that they can do great on SASE firewalls. So another recommendation is to watch out for slideware. So, being able to show something doesn't mean that it can actually execute. So, engaging companies like us to do a POC to come and help you, engaging us to find the right vendor for you and help you out with a proof of concept and getting things going can bring a lot of value to this, especially for technology that is on top of the hype cycle. Right? You want to make sure that when the rubber meets the road, that they can actually execute on this, and also look for cloud-native solutions. Right? Organizations that either were born in there from a SASE perspective, born in the cloud, or have retooled, in a way that makes them able to leverage cloud technologies as well. So we'll be sharing this We'll be sharing this PowerPoint with everybody. So the links will be there for you to copy and search and read, and look forward to having future conversations with you guys about this. And I think the next slide is our final slide, and we're almost at the 15-minute leftover mark. So I wanted to and I think we can both kind of handle this one, Nor, but I can take a first stab at it. When organizations, how are we seeing that organizations are getting value out of SASE, and how will organizations get more value? Leveraging the controls as much as possible, I think, really goes hand in hand to with what Nor talked about, which is make sure that those controls that you're using, that those controls that are available as options for SASE, that you understand how you will use them and how you use them correctly. The hodgepodge of technologies can cause a lot of headaches, right? When you have one technology vendor trying to communicate with the other. When looking at SASE, look at it as an overall package that you're going to buy, and decide which pieces of that package makes the most sense. But we're finding that when clients choose a vendor and go 100% with that vendor, they get more value out of it. Being able to converge the management teams. So what I mean by management teams, I mean people managing the devices. So if your network team is in charge of SD-WAN and your firewall team's in charge of firewall, and you have a third team that's in charge of the CASB piece, and on and on and on, being able to bring those teams together and say, here's what here's the new vision, which is an overall network security or a zero trust architecture that we can be part of. Not just building the architecture from a technology perspective, but mapping those pieces to people process is going to make this type of project more successful. And the third bullet's very tricky because historically firewalls and those products have been very CapEx focused, right? Now that we're switching to a cloud model, we have to understand that we're now in a SASE. We're now in a OpEx model. So the SASE model is very OpEx focused. So operationally, what are we going to pay monthly for a firewall, and does it fit how my organization works? And will people understand that now there is a monthly charge that is bandwidth driven, that it's volume driven, versus the previous model, which was buy what you need for the next 3 years, or buy what you need for the next 5 years. So that shift of model needs to be communicated as well, that we're, like everything else is going OpEx, this may go OpEx as well. There is still some flexibility from the vendors right now to be able to still fit the old model and have some flexibility, but more and more we're moving towards a consumption-based model. Set reasonable expectations, right? I mean, I think that goes back to my previous slide, talking about the hype cycle. You need to identify what should be expected out of the vendor, and choosing that vendor carefully, not just the vendor that's doing great right now, but the vendor that has some amazing or really clear future steps that they're looking at it from a strategy perspective. Where are they going in the cloud, and does it fit where your organization wants to go, and where how your organization wants to grow as well. And then spend time in architecture and design considerations. Don't expect the vendor to give you the perfect view into the world. Identify how your world fits into it, and spend time in that architecture stage. This is a whole shift on how your network architecture will be. This is not just a product you're buying and plugging in. This shifts everything you're doing from a WAN, a network perspective, a user management perspective, a user endpoint security perspective. All those pieces will be changed and needs to be taken in consideration. So the impact to the technology will have a huge impact to the user experience as well. So spending time in architecture and design is highly recommended. So I don't know, Nora, if there's anything else you wanted to add. I know we had one more question we didn't handle.
Yeah,
so.
definitely.
Sorry.
So the first and last point, I just want to add a couple of points, right? So why the spending time in architecture design and leveraging controls, right? So the statement that I usually, when I converse with the customers, I always tell them, it doesn't matter if you have the best of each technology, right? It's the controls, the way you deploy the technology is as good in protecting you, right? So making sure you have correct architecture design talks, right? Having that, make sure it's already built in before deploying, and then putting in proper controls, right? That's the best way we can leverage your SASE provider. And it holds true not just for SASE, for any cybersecurity product that we're putting in, right? To really incorporate the full value, we have to make sure we're really using it according to the best recommendations, right? And yep, that's about it.
Perfect. Oh, that's good. Want me to read out that other question that we had?
Yeah, definitely.
And we can, yeah, just grab it here.
In the meantime, if anyone,
so the question, go ahead, Noor.
In the meantime, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to add it in the chat as well. Yeah, thank you. Please go ahead.
For sure, no problem. I'll turn on my video as I read it. How would perimeter protection differently address an endpoint that is compromised versus one that isn't, i.e., accessing a URL with valid credentials from a honeypot phone versus accessing a URL with valid credentials behind a secured office firewall?
All right, so I'll try to tackle this, and then you can take on further, Ivo. So
Sure.
when we have, and if there's a compromise and we're trying to access a URL, right? From a perspective of SASE provider, depending on the way it's deployed, for example, if there's a potential compromise or something you deployed in the cloud, right? The SASE provider and the different technologies should be able to, one, if you have it in a prospect of being able to decline the traffic, or decline the traffic altogether. For example, if it's command and control beaconing, right, and the traffic is trying to go out from your the last edge device, right? One, the SASE technology should be able to protect it, right? And if you have it not from a perspective in cloud, not in line, if you have it from a perspective of just alert, it should be able to alert it and further provide you that indicator of compromise in your SIM, right? If you're incorporating that data into your SIM solution or any other syslog provider, right? So that's really how it is differentiated if there's a potential compromise or not, right? Now, if there's no potential compromise, it really depends on security policies you have enabled for that, right? It can either decline or allow that traffic. Hopefully, it was able to provide an answer.
Yeah, hopefully. I think the layering of security controls it's always been there, right? We've always had the ability to put an antivirus and put a firewall. I think what we're looking at here is bringing it all together and telling a story. And bringing in threat intelligence information, bringing in the ability to identify applications that are being used. And I think that's one of the themes that kind of runs throughout this presentation, is especially when we're talking about things like QoS and SD-WAN, is where we need to get down to the applications and understand the value of that application. The network team wants to understand the value of the application so they can prioritize it from a latency and bandwidth perspective. And as security professionals, we want to understand the application so we can say whether it's sanctioned, whether it's carrying the direct data, whether the data is leaking from the environment or not. So, we talked, we had that major jump from firewall to the next gen firewall when we started to understand applications. And this is the next step, is to understand applications and their value from an asset and communication perspective on the internet and within the network. So that's the main piece. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, good points, right? Even to reach out to the defend, to alert, yeah, right? There's different feeds that are incorporated. You have a threat intel. There's sandboxing available, right, for different SASE providers, and there's the additional advanced threat protection features, right, that really are able to incorporate and provide that judgment, right, if it's traffic should be blocked or not, right, if it's a potential compromise, right?
Perfect. Yeah, no, absolutely. So with that, I think that those were, I don't think we had any questions pop up. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to us through the, I think there's a communication method through Robert that we can get. Any other, we have more events coming, we have more information and more members of our team engaging in these type of vendor agnostic conversations like we're having today, or even vendor specific events as well that we'll be hosting for clients. If you go to cdw.ca/events, you'll be able to see what we have, and again, thank you everybody for your time. Thank you for joining today, and thanks Noor for the amazing presentation. And everybody have a good day. Is there anything else we need to touch on, Robert, Noor, before we close out today?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Perfect.